Sometimes the family we need finds us in the most unexpected ways. In the winter of 1878, a mountain man named Caleb Stone learned this truth when he rode into town expecting one mail-order bride and found 5 desperate sisters instead. Their parents had died on the westward journey, leaving them orphaned and alone. The eldest was 23, the youngest just 9, and they had nowhere else to go. Any reasonable man would have chosen one and sent the others away. But Caleb Stone looked at those 5 frightened faces and said something that shocked everyone in town. All 5 can stay. What happened next in that remote Wyoming cabin would become a story about belonging, second chances, and the kind of love that builds a family from strangers. Could one lonely man and 5 lost sisters truly become what each other needed most? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind off the high peaks had teeth that winter. Caleb Stone felt it through his wool coat as he guided his horse down the narrow trail toward Timber Ridge, the small town that served as the only mark of civilization for 50 miles in any direction. 3 years he'd lived alone in these mountains, and in all that time he'd made this journey maybe a dozen times, always for supplies, always alone, always returning to an empty cabin that echoed with memories he couldn't quite let go. The leather cord around his neck held a simple gold band, worn smooth from years of wear. Sarah's ring. He'd put it there the day they buried her, unable to leave it in the cold ground, but equally unable to wear it on his own hand anymore. Some days he forgot it was there. Other days it felt heavy as a millstone. Caleb was 42 years old, though the mirror showed a man who could pass for older. The mountains did that, carved lines into your face, turned your hair silver at the temples, put a permanent squint around your eyes from scanning horizons. He stood just over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders from years of splitting wood and hauling stone. His hands were scarred and calloused, capable hands that had built a life from nothing but determination and sweat. He'd come west with Sarah 15 years ago, young and full of dreams about making something of their own. They'd found this valley, this perfect spot where a creek ran clear and cold, where timber grew thick enough to build with, where the hunting was good and the soil, though rocky, would grow enough to sustain them. They'd built the cabin together, her working beside him, both of them laughing at their mistakes and celebrating their small victories. Then came the fever 3 winters back. It took her in 4 days. He'd ridden through a blizzard to fetch the doctor from Timber Ridge, but by the time they returned, she was already gone. The cabin had felt like a tomb ever since. For 2 years, Caleb had simply existed. He hunted, he trapped, he kept the cabin standing. He spoke to no one unless necessity demanded it. The people of Timber Ridge knew him as reliable but distant, the mountain man who came to town with prime furs, who paid his bills in full, who never caused trouble and never stayed for conversation. They respected him. They also left him alone. But loneliness is a patient enemy. It doesn't attack all at once. It works slowly, wearing you down like water on stone, until one day you realize the silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's suffocating. That's when Caleb made his decision. He couldn't bring Sarah back. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could choose to keep living instead of just surviving. He could open his heart to the possibility of companionship again, even if it felt like a betrayal of everything he'd lost. The matrimonial advertisements in the territorial newspaper had seemed absurd at first. Women seeking husbands in the West, men seeking wives, sight unseen. But the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. He wasn't looking for romance. That ship had sailed and sunk. He was looking for partnership, for someone to share the burden of days, for a voice other than his own echoing off log walls. He'd written his letter carefully, honestly, described himself, his age, his situation, described the cabin, the isolation, the hard work required just to survive a mountain winter. He didn't paint it prettier than it was. Any woman who came needed to know what she was getting into. 3 women had replied. He'd chosen Mary Brennan because her letter had been the most straightforward. No flowery language, no unrealistic expectations. She was 23, orphaned, working as a seamstress in St. Louis. She wrote that she wanted a fresh start, a purpose, and was willing to work hard for both. She didn't promise love, and neither did he. It seemed like an honest foundation. They'd exchanged 4 more letters over the following months. He learned she was educated, practical, and had no romantic illusions about frontier life. She learned he was solitary but not unkind, that he expected partnership but would offer respect in return. It wasn't passion, but it felt like something that might grow into companionship. And that was enough. Now, as Caleb rode into Timber Ridge on this grey January afternoon, he felt the unfamiliar flutter of nerves in his chest. The train was due within the hour. Mary Brennan would be on it. By tomorrow, she'd be in his cabin, and his life would be changed forever. The town looked as it always did, a single street of weathered buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, a few horses tied at the rail outside the general store. The train depot sat at the far end, a small wooden structure with a covered platform. Caleb had checked the schedule 3 times. The afternoon train from the east was rarely late. He tied his horse outside the saloon and walked toward the depot, his boots crunching in the frozen mud. A few townspeople noticed him, their expressions showing surprise. Caleb Stone, coming to meet the train. That was unusual enough to warrant attention. Mrs. Hadley, the elderly woman who ran the boarding house, smiled at him from her porch. She was one of the few people in town who'd shown him kindness after Sarah's death, bringing him food those first terrible weeks, never demanding conversation, just leaving covered dishes on his porch with a gentle pat on his arm. "Waiting for someone, Mr. Stone?" she called out. Caleb tipped his hat. "Yes, ma'am. A friend from back east." Her eyes twinkled with knowing warmth. News travelled fast in small towns, and a mail-order bride was news indeed. "Well, I hope your friend has a safe journey and finds everything here to their liking." "Thank you, Mrs. Hadley." He continued to the depot, aware of eyes following him. Let them look. Let them gossip. By this time tomorrow, he and Mary would be back in the mountains, and Timber Ridge could think whatever it wanted. The station master, a thin man named Polk, nodded as Caleb entered the small waiting room. A pot-bellied stove threw heat into the cramped space, and a few other people waited on the wooden benches, a traveling salesman by the look of him, and a young couple holding hands. Caleb stood by the window, watching the empty tracks stretch east into the grey distance. His heart beat harder than it should. This was a practical arrangement, nothing more. But still, he was about to meet the woman who would share his home, his table, his life. The weight of that pressed down on him. The distant whistle reached them first, a lonely sound across the winter landscape. Then the rhythmic chug of the engine grew louder, and finally the train itself appeared, black smoke trailing against white sky. The great iron beast hissed and squealed as it slowed, coming to rest with a final explosive release of steam. Caleb stepped out onto the platform, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. The conductor swung down, placed a step stool, and began helping passengers descend. An older gentleman with a carpet bag, the salesman moving to greet him, a young family with 2 small children. And then he saw them. 5 women descended from the train car. 5. His eyes found the eldest immediately. She matched the small photograph Mary had sent. Dark hair pinned up beneath a worn bonnet, a threadbare travelling coat, and eyes that found his with an expression of desperate hope mixed with absolute terror. But she wasn't alone. 4 other females stood with her on that platform, ranging in age from what looked like late teens down to a child barely tall enough to see over the platform edge. They huddled together like birds before a storm, clutching bags and each other, and every single one of them was looking at him with the same frightened hope. Caleb's mind went blank. This couldn't be right. There had to be some mistake. He walked forward slowly, and the eldest woman stepped toward him, her hand reaching out as if to steady herself. "Mr. Stone?" Her voice trembled but held firm. "I'm Mary Brennan." Up close, he could see she'd been crying. Recently, her eyes were red-rimmed, and her composure was held together by pure force of will. "Miss Brennan." He removed his hat, his mind still trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "I wasn't expecting—" "I know." She cut him off gently, and tears spilled over despite her best efforts. "I know this isn't what we agreed. I know this isn't fair to you. But please, Mr. Stone, please let me explain before you send us away." Send us away. The words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the 4 others again. The second oldest, maybe 19, had her arm around a girl of perhaps 15. Another girl, maybe 12, held tight to the smallest one, a child with huge eyes and tangled blonde curls who couldn't be more than 9 years old. "These are my sisters," Mary said, and her voice broke on the word. "Mr. Stone, our parents died 6 weeks ago. Fever on the journey west. They're buried in Kansas. We had nothing, no money, nowhere to go. I had your letters and this ticket you sent, and I thought if I could just get here, if I could just explain in person, maybe—" She couldn't finish. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back sobs. The townspeople were gathering now, drawn by the unusual scene. Caleb could feel their stares, could hear the whispers starting. He looked at the 5 women before him. No, 5 girls, because even Mary looked impossibly young in that moment, impossibly vulnerable. His whole life, planned out in careful letters and reasonable expectations, had just been turned upside down. 1 woman he'd prepared for. 1 woman his cabin could hold. 1 woman he might learn to care for in time. But 5. It was impossible. It was insane. Any reasonable man would choose the bride he'd sent for and help the others find some other arrangement. There were charitable organizations, surely, churches that helped orphans. Something. He opened his mouth to say exactly that. And then the smallest one, the child with the blonde curls, looked up at him with eyes that held more grief than any child should know, and said in the tiniest whisper, "Please, mister, we'll be good. We promise we'll be good." Something in Caleb's chest cracked wide open. He thought of Sarah, who'd wanted children so badly and never gotten the chance. He thought of his empty cabin and his hollow life. He thought of these 5 sisters, orphaned and desperate, holding on to each other because they had nothing else left in the world. And he thought about what Sarah would have done. He knew exactly what Sarah would have done. Caleb looked at Mary Brennan, then at each of her sisters in turn. He saw the station master watching, saw Mrs. Hadley with her hand pressed to her heart, saw the entire town of Timber Ridge holding its breath. "All 5 can stay," he said. The words fell into absolute silence. Then Mary Brennan collapsed against him, sobbing so hard her whole body shook, and Caleb found himself holding a stranger, while her 4 sisters crowded around them, crying with relief, and the whole town erupted into shocked murmurs. Caleb Stone had just made a decision that would change everything. He just didn't know yet how much. It took 20 minutes to load everything into Caleb's wagon. 20 minutes during which the entire population of Timber Ridge seemed to find reasons to walk past the depot, stealing glances and whispering behind gloved hands. Caleb ignored them all, focusing instead on securing the sisters' meager belongings: 3 carpet bags, a trunk with a broken latch, and a wooden box tied with twine. Mary had composed herself, though her eyes remained red. She stood with her sisters in a tight cluster, speaking to them in low, urgent tones. Caleb caught fragments as he worked. "Remember your manners. Catherine, help with Sophie. Rebecca, stay close. Emma, don't wander." Names. He should learn their names properly. He paused, hands on the wagon rail, and turned to face them. "Before we head out," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "I should know who's who." Mary stepped forward, one hand resting on the shoulder of the youngest. "Of course. Mr. Stone, these are my sisters." She gestured to each in turn. "Catherine is 19. The tall girl with auburn hair nodded, her expression guarded but intelligent. Rebecca's 15. A quieter girl with Mary's same dark hair, holding what looked like a leather-bound book against her chest. Emma is 12. A freckled girl with quick, bright eyes that took in everything. And this is Sophie. She's 9. The little one with the blonde curls pressed closer to Mary, her thumb creeping toward her mouth before she caught herself and lowered her hand. "Sophie Brennan," Caleb said gently, crouching down to her level. "That's a fine name." She blinked at him, surprised he'd spoken directly to her. "Thank you, sir. You can call me Caleb, all of you." He straightened, meeting Mary's eyes. "We're going to be living under the same roof. No need for formality." "That's very kind, Mr. Caleb." Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you for this, for giving us a chance." "Save your thanks until you see what you're getting into," he said, not unkindly. "It's a hard life up in those mountains. Winter's just starting and it gets brutal. The cabin's small, built for 1, maybe 2 people. We're going to have to make do with what there is." "We're accustomed to making do," Catherine said, speaking for the first time. Her voice had an edge to it, a pride that hadn't been broken by circumstances. "We won't be a burden." "Didn't say you would be." Caleb studied her, seeing the defensive set of her shoulders. This one had been protecting her, sisters, carrying weight that should have been her parents. "Just want you to know what to expect." "We appreciate your honesty," Mary said quickly, shooting Catherine a look that clearly meant hush. "And we'll do whatever we can to earn our keep. I can cook and clean. Catherine's strong and not afraid of hard work. Rebecca sews beautifully. Emma's wonderful with animals. And Sophie's 9, Caleb interrupted gently. She doesn't need to earn anything. She's a child." Mary's eyes filled again, but she blinked the tears back. "You're a good man, Mr. Stone." "Caleb. Better than we had any right to hope for." He turned away, uncomfortable with the praise. "We should get moving. It's a 2-hour ride, and I'd rather be home before full dark." The wagon had a bench seat that could fit 3 if they squeezed. Caleb helped Mary up first, then Sophie, who wedged between them. The other 3 climbed into the back, settling among the supplies and bags. Caleb had brought extra blankets, thankfully. The temperature was dropping as the afternoon wore on. As he took up the reins, Mrs. Hadley appeared at the side of the wagon, a large basket in her hands. "Mr. Stone, a moment." She passed the basket up to Mary. "Some bread and cheese for your journey, and a jar of my preserves. Welcome to Wyoming territory, dear. All of you." "Thank you," Mary managed, her voice thick. "That's very kind." Mrs. Hadley patted her hand. "You come to town whenever you need. You understand? My door's always open." Caleb nodded his gratitude, and the old woman stepped back. He clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. The whispers followed them all the way out of town. The trail to Caleb's cabin wound through pine forest and across frozen streams, climbing steadily into the mountains. The sisters were quiet at first, absorbing their new reality. Sophie fell asleep against Caleb's arm within the first mile, her small body finally giving in to exhaustion. "How long has she been awake?" Caleb asked Mary quietly. 2 days, mostly. She's been too frightened to sleep properly. Nightmares about our parents. That's hard. It's been hardest on her and Emma. They're so young." Mary adjusted the blanket around Sophie's shoulders. "Catherine and Rebecca and we at least understand what's happened. But those two, they keep asking when Mama and Papa are coming back." Caleb felt the familiar ache of loss. He knew that confusion, that inability to accept the permanent nature of death. "Takes time. We don't have much of that, do we?" Mary's laugh was bitter. "No time to grieve properly. No time to figure out what comes next. Just survive. Keep moving. Keep the family together. You've done well by them, getting them this far." She shook her head. "I've barely held us together. The money ran out in Kansas. I sold everything we had left. Mama's jewelry, Papa's watch, anything of value, just to buy food and keep us moving. Your ticket was the only thing that got us here. If you'd turned us away—" Her voice broke. "I don't know what we would have done." Caleb didn't answer immediately. What could he say? She was right. If he'd refused them, their situation would have been desperate. 5 women alone in a frontier town with no money and no prospects, that path led nowhere good. "What was your father's trade?" he asked instead. "He was a school teacher, in Ohio originally. We had a good life there, a house, friends, everything settled and safe. But Papa got it into his head that we should go west, that there were opportunities for educated men in the new territories. Mama tried to talk him out of it, but once Papa decided something—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "He was stubborn. He was certain, and wrong, as it turned out. We sold everything and joined a wagon train, made it as far as Kansas before the fever hit. Papa went first, then Mama 3 days later. They're buried side by side in a town called Hutchinson. I don't even know if there's a marker. We couldn't afford one." The pain in her voice was raw, fresh. Caleb knew that pain. It was the same one that woke him in the middle of the night, reaching for someone who wasn't there. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "So am I." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady plod of the horses. Behind them, Caleb could hear the other sisters talking quietly among themselves. "What's it like?" Rebecca's voice drifted forward. "The cabin?" "Small," Emma answered. "He said it was small." "Small's better than nothing," Catherine said firmly. "We'll make it work." "What if he changes his mind?" Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if he decides we're too much trouble and sends us away?" "He won't." That was Rebecca, surprising certainty in her tone. "Did you see his face when Sophie asked him? He won't send us away." Mary glanced at Caleb, a question in her eyes. He kept his gaze on the trail ahead. "What made you say yes?" she asked quietly, just for him. "Really? Was it pity? He considered that. Partly, but mostly. He paused, searching for the right words. Mostly, I thought about what my wife would have done. Sarah. She died 3 years ago. Fever, like your parents. And I know without a doubt that if she'd been standing on that platform and seen 5 orphaned girls with nowhere to go, she'd have brought all of you home without a second thought. Mary was silent for a long moment. She must have been a wonderful woman. She was. I'll never be able to replace her. Caleb looked at her then, this young woman who'd traveled halfway across the country, on faith alone, who'd held her family together through impossible circumstances, who sat beside him now with a sleeping child in her arms and worry carved into every line of her face. I'm not asking you to replace anyone, he said. I'm asking you to share a life, to be a partner. That's what we agreed in the letters, and that's what I'm still offering. The circumstances have changed, but the basic arrangement hasn't. The basic arrangement was 1 woman, not 5. I'm aware. A dry smile tugged at his mouth. We'll figure it out. You keep saying that. But how? Caleb, there's no possible way. Mary. He kept his voice level, calm. I've survived in these mountains alone for 3 years. I've weathered blizzards that would kill a man in an hour. I've fought off wolves and built a cabin with my bare hands and made a life from nothing. If I can do all that, I can figure out how to house and feed 5 more people. It won't be easy. It won't be comfortable. But we'll manage. She stared at him, something like wonder crossing her face. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, I'd be turning this wagon around right now. The trail opened up suddenly, breaking through the tree line into a small valley. Smoke rose from a chimney in the distance. The cabin nestled against the mountainside, with dark pines rising behind it. It looked impossibly small from here, impossibly isolated. There, Caleb said, pointing. That's home. The word hung in the air between them. Home. A place they'd all lost and desperately needed to find again. In the back of the wagon, the sisters had gone quiet, staring at the tiny cabin that represented their entire future. It really is small, Emma whispered. It's perfect, Rebecca said fiercely. Catherine said nothing, but Caleb saw her wipe at her eyes. Sophie stirred against his arm, waking slowly. She blinked up at him, confused for a moment, then seemed to remember where she was. Her gaze followed his pointing finger to the cabin. Is that where we're going to live? She asked. If you want to, Caleb said. It's not much, but it's solid and warm and safe. Will we stay together? All of us? The question held the weight of every fear she'd carried since her parents died. Caleb understood it instinctively, the terror of being separated, of losing the only family she had left. All of you, he promised. We'll stay together. Sophie studied his face for a long moment, those serious eyes searching for the truth. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded once and settled back against his side. Okay, she said simply. Then I like it. Mary let out a shaky laugh, and Caleb urged the horses forward down the slope toward the cabin, toward whatever impossible future they were about to build together. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. It was beautiful and harsh in equal measure, like everything in this territory, like life itself. Caleb had made his choice on that train platform. Now came the hard part, living with the consequences and somehow making it work. But as he guided the wagon toward home, 5 orphaned sisters huddled together in hope and exhaustion, he found he didn't regret it. Not yet. Maybe he was a fool. Maybe he'd just taken on more than any one man could handle. But maybe, just maybe, he'd done the right thing. Time would tell. 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and adjustment. The addition began to take shape. A solid frame rising against the cabin's east wall, the skeleton of something larger, something permanent. Caleb and Catherine worked on it daily, joined sometimes by Mary or Rebecca when their other tasks allowed. Even Emma helped, carrying tools and nails, learning the names of things. The routine they'd established that first morning solidified into rhythm. Mary rose earliest to start the fire and begin breakfast. Caleb tended the animals. The girls took turns with chores, hauling water, sweeping, washing, mending. In the evenings they gathered around the table, and Rebecca began teaching Sophie to read, using the family Bible, its worn pages containing the names of parents and grandparents, a lineage that went back 3 generations. "Sound it out," Rebecca encouraged, her finger under a word. "Beget." "Begot," Sophie said carefully. "Abraham begot Isaac." "Very good. And what does begot mean? Had a son?" "Exactly. It's an old way of saying someone was someone's father." Caleb listened to this from his spot by the fire, where he was working on a project of his own, carving a small wooden horse from a piece of pine. The work was delicate, requiring patience and precision, skills he'd learned years ago but rarely used. His hands, so accustomed to the rough work of survival, remembered the gentler motions. Emma noticed first. "What are you making?" "A horse." "For Sophie." He showed her the emerging shape, the curved neck, the suggestion of a mane. "Thought she might like something to play with." "She'll love it." Emma watched his knife work for a moment. "Can you teach me? How to carve? Dangerous work, easy to cut yourself if you're not careful." "I'll be careful, I promise." Caleb considered, then nodded. "All right, but we start with something simple, and you follow my instructions exactly." Emma's face lit up with such pure joy that Caleb felt something in his chest tighten. When had he last made someone that happy with such a small thing? The days grew colder as January deepened. Snow fell in earnest, piling against the cabin walls, transforming the landscape into something beautiful and deadly. Caleb checked his trap lines in the early mornings, often taking Emma with him to teach her how to read the forest, how to see the signs that others missed. "There," he said one morning, pointing to tracks in the fresh snow. "What is that?" Emma crouched, studying the prints. "Deer." "Good. How can you tell?" 2 toes. And the way they're spaced." She was walking, not running. "She." "The prints are smaller. Probably a doe." Caleb smiled. "You're learning." They found a rabbit in one of his snares, and Emma watched as he dispatched it quickly and humanely. Her face was pale but determined. "It's hard," she said quietly. "Killing things." "It is. And it should be. The day it gets easy is the day you've lost something important." He reset the snare with practiced hands. "We take what we need to survive, but we don't waste, and we don't cause unnecessary suffering. That's the bargain. Did you learn that from your father?" "From necessity, and from making mistakes." He straightened, the rabbit slung over his shoulder. "Come on. Your sisters will be wondering where we are." As they walked back through the snow-heavy forest, Emma asked, "Do you miss her? Your wife?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that directly, not in 3 years. "Every day," he said honestly. "But it's different now. The pain's not as sharp, more like an old ache that you learn to live with. That's how I feel about Mama and Papa, like there's this empty place that used to be full, and now it just hurts, but less than it did. That's grief. It changes shape over time, but it doesn't disappear. You just learn to carry it better." Emma nodded, absorbing this. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the snow crunching under their boots. "Caleb," she said finally, "thank you for letting us stay, for teaching me things, for being kind." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just put his hand on her shoulder briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement and affection. It seemed to be enough. That afternoon, as Caleb and Catherine were fitting joists for the addition's roof, a deer stumbled into the clearing near the cabin. Emma saw it first from the window and called out, "Caleb, there's something wrong with it." He set down his tools and went to look. The deer, a young doe, was limping badly, favoring her left foreleg. As he watched, she stumbled and nearly fell. "She's hurt," Emma said, already pulling on her coat. "We have to help her." "Emma, wild animals don't take kindly to help. She might be injured, but she's still dangerous." But Emma was already outside, moving slowly toward the deer with her hands extended, making soft, soothing sounds. Caleb followed, ready to intervene if needed. To his surprise, the doe didn't bolt. She stood trembling, sides heaving, clearly exhausted and in pain. Emma approached carefully, speaking in that gentle voice she used with the horses. "It's all right. We won't hurt you. Let me see." She reached out slowly, and the deer allowed it, too weak or too desperate to flee. Emma's hands found the injured leg, probing gently. "There's something caught around her ankle. Wire or... no, it's thorns. A whole mass of them cutting into the skin." Caleb moved closer, saw she was right. The deer had gotten tangled in a thorn bush, and the vines had wrapped tight around her leg, cutting circulation and causing infection. "We need to cut them away," Emma said, "but it's going to hurt her. Can you hold her still?" Caleb positioned himself at the deer's head, hands firm but gentle on her neck, murmuring the same kind of nonsense he used with spooked horses. Emma worked quickly, using Caleb's knife to carefully cut away the thorned vines, her hands steady despite the blood. Mary and the other sisters had gathered to watch, standing on the porch in the cold. "She's good with that," Mary said quietly to Catherine. "Natural healer's hands." When the last of the thorns were removed, Emma cleaned the wounds with snow, then fashioned a poultice from herbs she'd seen Caleb use on the horses. The deer stood still through all of it, as if she understood she was being helped. "She needs rest and food," Emma said. "Can we keep her here, just for a few days until she's stronger?" "She's wild, Emma. Keeping her penned goes against her nature." "I know, but if we let her go now, she'll die. The wounds are infected. She needs care." Caleb looked at the girl's pleading face, at the wounded animal, and sighed. 3 days. We'll put her in the barn, give her hay and water. But then she goes free, whether she's fully healed or not. Agreed?" "Agreed." Together they led the doe to the barn, or rather, she followed Emma, who seemed to have formed some kind of bond with the creature. They settled her in a corner stall, and Emma spent the rest of the afternoon sitting with her, changing the poultice, talking in that gentle voice. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Rebecca pulled out a small leather-bound book that Caleb had noticed her carrying, but never questioned. "I've been drawing," she said shyly, opening it to show them. "Since we arrived. I hope you don't mind." The pages were filled with sketches, remarkably good ones, the cabin from different angles, Jack standing in the snow, Sophie sleeping curled up in the loft, Mary at the hearth, Caleb himself, captured in profile while he worked on the addition, concentration etched into his features. "These are beautiful," Mary breathed. Rebecca turned more pages. There were scenes from their journey, the train station, the wagon ride, their first sight of the cabin, and more recent ones, Emma with the horses, Catherine wielding an axe, the half-built addition taking shape. "You're recording our life here," Caleb said, understanding. "I wanted to remember," Rebecca said softly. "After everything we lost, I wanted to make sure we didn't forget this. How it felt to find home again." There was that word again. Home. It came up more and more often, slipping into their conversations naturally, no longer questioned or qualified. "Can I see the one of me and the horses?" Emma asked, and Rebecca handed over the book. They passed it around, each examining the sketches, seeing themselves through Rebecca's eyes. She'd captured not just their appearances, but something deeper. The determination in Catherine's stance, the tenderness in Mary's expression as she looked at Sophie, the careful focus in Caleb's hands as he worked. "You have a real gift," Mary said. "Mama would have been so proud." Rebecca's eyes filled, but she smiled. "She's the one who gave me the sketchbook, last birthday before we left Ohio. She said every journey should be recorded." "Then you're honoring her," Caleb said, "keeping the promise she saw in you." Later, when the girls had climbed to the loft and Mary was banking the fire for the night, she paused beside Caleb. "They're healing," she said quietly. "All of them. I can see it. The grief's still there, but they're finding joy again, finding purpose. So are you." She looked at him, surprised. "Am I? You smiled today. Really smiled, not just being brave. And you've stopped apologizing for being here." "Have I?" She considered that. "I suppose I have. This place, it's starting to feel less like charity and more like home," Caleb finished. "Yes, home." She met his eyes, and something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the foundation for it. Trust, respect, the beginning of something real. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Mary." He watched her climb the ladder, then headed out to the barn. The deer was resting comfortably, Emma's careful nursing having eased her pain. The horses were settled. Everything was as it should be. Caleb lay down on his makeshift bed, listening to the wind outside, and realized he was content. More than content, he was grateful. These 5 strangers had disrupted his carefully maintained solitude and given him back something he'd thought lost forever. A reason to wake up in the morning, a purpose beyond mere survival. A family. Winter tightened its grip on the mountains. The snow piled higher, and the wind came down from the peaks with a ferocity that made the cabin walls shudder. Caleb worked longer hours on the addition, knowing that every day counted. Once the worst storms hit, construction would become impossible. Catherine worked beside him without complaint, even when the cold made their fingers ache and their breath came in white clouds. She'd proven herself as capable as any man Caleb had worked with, strong and steady and unafraid of hard labor. "You planning to finish before we freeze to death?" she asked one afternoon, a hint of dry humor in her voice. "That's the general idea." Caleb hammered another nail home. "Why are you getting impatient?" "Just tired of sleeping in a pile like puppies. Rebecca kicks in her sleep. So does Sophie. And Emma talks." Mary had joined them, bringing hot coffee in tin cups. "We're a symphony of sleep disturbances." Caleb accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the cup's warmth. "Another week, maybe less. Then you'll have proper beds and walls and privacy." "We're grateful," Mary said. "You know that, right? For everything you're doing." "It's just carpentry. It's more than that. It's—" She paused, searching for words. "It's building us a future, giving us permanence. That means something." Their eyes met. And Caleb felt that same pull he'd been noticing more and more lately. Mary wasn't just the practical arrangement he'd written for any more. She was becoming someone he looked forward to seeing each morning, whose opinion he valued, whose smile made the work feel lighter. "Well," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with the emotion, "can't have you all crowded in that loft forever." That evening, Caleb pulled out his whittling project again. The wooden horse was nearly finished, just needed smoothing and a few final details. He worked by lamplight while the girls played a card game Rebecca had taught them, their laughter filling the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Sophie kept glancing over at what he was making, curiosity clear on her small face, but she didn't ask. She'd learned in these weeks to be patient, to trust that good things would come if she waited. When Caleb finally set down his knife and held up the completed carving, Sophie's eyes went wide. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's for you." He handed it to her, and she took it with the reverence usually reserved for precious things. "Thought you might like something to play with." Sophie turned the horse over in her hands, examining every detail. The flowing mane, the lifted hoof, the proud arch of the neck. Then she launched herself at Caleb, wrapping her arms around him with such force she nearly knocked him off his chair. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Her voice was muffled against his shirt, and when she pulled back, her eyes were shining with tears. "I love it. I'll keep it forever and ever." "It's just a piece of wood," Caleb said, but his voice was rough. "It's not just wood, it's—" Sophie struggled to articulate what she felt. "It's the first present anyone's given me since Mama and Papa died. It's special." Across the cabin, Mary stood frozen at the hearth, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Catherine had turned away, but her shoulders were shaking. Even Rebecca had closed her eyes, overwhelmed. Emma broke the moment by saying, "Can you make me something too, when you have time? What would you want?" "A bird, a hawk, maybe, like the one that lives in the big pine." "I think I can manage that." "And me?" Rebecca asked shyly. "Could you make me a rose? I know that's probably too hard, but I'll try." Caleb looked around at them all, these girls who'd come into his life by accident and stayed by choice. "I'll make each of you something. Give me time." Sophie clutched her horse to her chest and climbed up to the loft, where she carefully placed it on the small shelf beside her bedroll. Caleb watched her arrange it just so. This 9-year-old child who'd lost everything, finding joy in a simple carved toy. Mary came to stand beside him, wiping at her eyes. "You're good with her," she said quietly. "With all of them. They're easy to be good to. Not everyone would think so. 5 orphaned girls, no blood relation, nothing owed. Most men would have sent us away without a second thought. I'm not most men. No." She smiled through her tears. "You're certainly not." The next day, they made the trip to Timber Ridge for supplies. All 7 of them crowded into the wagon, bundled against the cold. It was the first time the whole family had gone to town together, and Caleb was aware of how they must look. Him with his 5 supposed charges, none of them related by blood. The entire arrangement highly irregular by any standard. Let them stare, he thought. We know what we are. The town reacted exactly as he'd expected. Whispers followed them down the street. Conversation stopped when they approached. Judgmental eyes tracked their every move. But there were kind faces, too. Mrs. Hadley greeted them warmly at the general store, fussing over the girls and pressing a bag of peppermints into Sophie's hands. The blacksmith, a taciturn man named Gunderson, nodded approval at Catherine when he saw her help Caleb load supplies. And then there was Thomas Mercer, a young ranch hand who worked at the double bar spread north of town. He was perhaps 21, with an honest face and work-roughened hands, and the moment he saw Catherine, his eyes lit up with unmistakable interest. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm Thomas. I don't think we've been properly introduced." Catherine, to Caleb's surprise, blushed. "Catherine Brennan. Pleased to meet you, Miss Brennan. You settling in all right out at the Stone place?" "We're managing." She lifted her chin slightly, defensive. "It's hard work, but we're not afraid of that." "I can see that." Thomas smiled, and it was a good smile, warm and genuine. "If you ever need anything, extra hands with heavy work, or just someone to talk to, my family's ranch is just up the valley. We're neighbors in a manner of speaking." "That's kind of you." Caleb watched this exchange with mixed feelings. Catherine was 19, old enough to receive attention from young men. But the protective instinct that had awakened when he'd taken in these girls flared up nonetheless. Thomas must have sensed it, because he addressed Caleb directly. "Mr. Stone, I hope I'm not being too forward. I just wanted to offer help if it's ever needed." "That's neighborly of you," Caleb said carefully. "We'll keep it in mind." As they loaded the last of the supplies and prepared to head home, Catherine glanced back at where Thomas stood outside the general store, and he raised his hand in farewell. She waved back, a small smile playing at her lips. Mary caught Caleb's eye and grinned. "Don't worry, Papa Bear. He seems like a decent young man." "I'm not worrying." "You're absolutely worrying. I can see it all over your face." "She's 19. She's practically a child. She's a grown woman who's been through more hardship than most people twice her age. If she wants to smile at a nice young man, that's her right." Caleb grunted, unwilling to concede the point, but unable to argue it. The ride home was cheerful despite the cold. The girls chattered about what they'd seen in town, the people they'd met, the kindness shown by some, and the judgment from others. Sophie showed Emma her peppermints, carefully dividing them into equal shares so everyone could have one. As the cabin came into view in the late afternoon light, smoke rising from its chimney, the addition nearly complete beside it, Caleb felt a swell of something that might have been pride. They'd done this, built this, made something out of nothing but determination and hard work. "Home," Sophie said contentedly, and no one corrected her. Because it was. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday morning in early February, riding a rented horse and dressed in a fine wool coat that marked him as someone from back east. Caleb was splitting wood when he saw the rider approaching, and something in his gut tightened with instinctive wariness. The man dismounted at the edge of the clearing, taking in the cabin and addition with calculating eyes. He was perhaps 50, well-fed and prosperous-looking, with the kind of face that smiled easily, but never warmly. "Mr. Caleb Stone?" he called out. "That's right." Caleb set down his axe, wiping his hands on his trousers. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Silas Brennan. I believe you have something, or rather, several someones, that belong to me." The blood in Caleb's veins turned to ice. Brennan, the same last name as Mary and her sisters. The cabin door opened, and Mary stepped out, her face draining of color when she saw the visitor. "Uncle Silas," she whispered. "Mary, dear." His smile was all teeth, no warmth. "What a chase you've led me on. When I heard about poor William and Margaret's deaths, I came as quickly as I could to collect you girls. Imagine my distress when I discovered you'd disappeared completely. It took 3 investigators and considerable expense to track you here to this—" He gestured dismissively at the cabin. "Remote location." "We don't need collecting," Mary said, her voice stronger now. "We're fine where we are." "Fine? Living in sin with a stranger in the wilderness? My dear child, You clearly don't understand your situation. Silas reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. I have here a legal summons. As the only surviving male relative of the Brennan family, I am entitled to guardianship of my late brother's children. All 5 of you are to return with me to Boston immediately. Caleb stepped forward. The girls are in my care now. Mary and I have an arrangement. An arrangement? Silas's eyebrows rose mockingly. How delightfully vague. Do you mean a legal marriage, registered and documented, or merely a convenient living situation? The silence that followed was damning. Caleb and Mary hadn't married. They'd been so focused on survival, on building the addition, on establishing their life together, that the formality had seemed unnecessary. Now that oversight might cost them everything. I thought not. Silas's smile widened. Mr. Stone, I'm sure you meant well, taking in these poor orphaned girls. But the law is quite clear. Without a legal marriage, you have no claim to them whatsoever. As their uncle and nearest male relative, I am their rightful guardian. We're not going with you. Catherine had appeared on the porch, Rebecca and Emma flanking her. Sophie clung to Emma's hand, her eyes wide with fear. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Catherine. Children obey their guardians. That's the law. We're not children. I'm 19, Mary's 23. And Rebecca is 15, Emma 12, and little Sophie is only 9. 3 minors who absolutely require a guardian. And where the younger ones go, I expect you'll all want to stay together, won't you? His voice took on a cruel edge. Unless you'd prefer to be separated, I'm sure I could find different situations for each of you. You can't do that! Mary's voice shook with fury. They're my sisters. We stay together. Then you'll all come to Boston with me. I have a hearing scheduled with the territorial judge in Timber Ridge 3 days from now. I strongly suggest you use that time to prepare yourselves for the journey east. Why are you doing this? Rebecca asked quietly. You never cared about us before. You didn't even come to Papa's funeral. Something flickered across Silas's face, annoyance at being questioned. I'm doing my duty to family, child. Surely you can appreciate that. But Caleb saw through it. This wasn't about duty or family concern. There was something else driving Silas Brennan to track 5 orphaned girls across half the country. What do you really want? Caleb asked flatly. I beg your pardon? You heard me. You don't care about these girls. You want something else. What is it? Silas's pleasant facade cracked slightly. My motivations are irrelevant. The law is on my side. I'll see you all in court 3 days hence. Good day. He mounted his horse and rode away without a backward glance, leaving them standing in shocked silence. As soon as he was out of sight, Mary's knees buckled. Caleb caught her before she fell, guiding her to sit on the porch steps. He can't take us, she said desperately. Caleb, he can't. We've finally found a home. We've finally started to heal. We'll fight this, Caleb said, though his mind was racing. There has to be a way. There isn't. Catherine's voice was flat, defeated. He's right about the law. Without a legal marriage, you're just a stranger who took us in. He's family, blood. The court will side with him. Then we'll get married, Caleb said immediately, looking at Mary. Today. Right now. We'll ride to town and find a preacher. It might not matter. Rebecca had her arms around Sophie, who was crying quietly. If the hearing's already scheduled, if he's already claimed legal guardianship, we have to try, Mary said, standing up with effort. It's our only chance. Emma had been silent through all of this, her face pale and thoughtful. Now she spoke up. Why does he want us? Rebecca's right. He never cared before. He didn't come to the funeral. He didn't write to offer condolences. So why now? It was the right question, and they all knew it. There must be something we don't know about, Mary said slowly. Something that makes us valuable to him. The inheritance, Rebecca said suddenly. Mama's mother, our grandmother. She died 2 years ago and left money in trust. Papa mentioned it once. Said it would be held until you turned 25, Mary. Mary's eyes widened. I'd forgotten about that. Mama said it was a small amount, nothing significant. What if it wasn't small? Catherine cut in. What if there's more money than we knew about? Enough to make it worth Uncle Silas's while to claim guardianship. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Silas Brennan hadn't come out of familial duty or concern. He'd come for money. And if he gained guardianship of the girls, he'd control any inheritance they were entitled to. That's it, Caleb said grimly. That's why he's here. He wants the money. But if there is an inheritance, it's ours, not his, Emma protested. Not if he's your legal guardian. He'd control the funds until Mary comes of age, and even then, if he splits you up, puts the younger ones in orphanages or indentured situations. Catherine's voice trailed off, the implications too horrible to voice. Sophie pulled away from Rebecca and ran to Caleb, wrapping her arms around his waist. Don't let him take us, she sobbed. Please, Caleb, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you. Caleb lifted her up, holding her close as she cried into his shoulder. He looked at Mary over the child's head, saw the same desperation and determination he felt mirrored in her eyes. We'll fight, he said again. Whatever it takes. I promised you could stay, all 5 of you. I'm not breaking that promise. How? Mary asked. Caleb, even if we marry right now, he can argue it's a sham arrangement, done only to prevent him from exercising his legal rights. The judge might not recognize it. Then we need a better lawyer than him. We need evidence that you're better off here. We need the town on our side. Caleb set Sophie down gently, his mind already working through possibilities. Mrs. Hadley. She's respected in Timber Ridge. If she testified on our behalf, and Thomas, Catherine said. His family's well known. They have influence. We'll get Rebecca's drawings, Emma added. Show how happy we've been here, how we've thrived. Mary was nodding, hope beginning to replace despair on her face. We'll show we're a real family, not just a convenient arrangement, that we belong together. But first, Caleb said, we get married, legal and proper. That gives us standing to fight. He extended his hand to Mary, and she took it without hesitation. Are you sure? She asked. This isn't what you signed up for. A mail-order bride arrangement is one thing, but a legal battle with a vengeful relative? I'm sure. And he was. These 5 women had become his family in the weeks they'd been here. He wasn't going to let some greedy Easterner tear them apart. We do this together. Together, Mary agreed. They rode to Timber Ridge within the hour, all 7 of them crowded into the wagon again. But this time there was no cheerful chatter, no excitement about going to town. This was a mission, desperate and urgent. The circuit preacher was staying at Mrs. Hadley's boarding house, and the old woman helped them arrange a quick ceremony in her parlour. Thomas Mercer served as witness, along with Mrs. Hadley herself. It wasn't the wedding either of them might have imagined. No flowers, no fancy dress, no celebration. Just necessary words, spoken before a preacher. A ring, Sarah's ring, which Caleb removed from the cord around his neck and slipped onto Mary's finger, and the signatures on a marriage certificate. But as Caleb kissed his new wife gently on the forehead and saw the tears streaming down her face, he knew it was real. Whatever had started as arrangement had become something more. They were bound now, not just by paper, but by choice and commitment and the family they'd built together. 3 days, Mary whispered as they left the boarding house. We have 3 days to prepare. Then we'll use every minute, Caleb replied. The battle for their family was about to begin. They had 3 days to build a case that would convince Judge Henry Blackwood to deny Silas Brennan's claim. 3 days to prove that 5 orphaned girls belonged with a mountain man they'd known for less than 2 months rather than with their blood relative. The odds were not in their favor. Caleb knew this as he sat at his kitchen table that first night, poring over the marriage certificate by lamplight. The paper was legal and binding, witnessed and signed. But Catherine had been right. Silas could argue it was a sham, a desperate attempt to circumvent his rightful claim. They needed more than a hastily arranged marriage. They needed testimony, evidence, community support. They needed a strategy. Mary sat across from him, her new wedding ring catching the light. She'd been staring at it for the past hour, turning her hand this way and that, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. Tell me about the lawyer, Caleb said. What do we know about him? Jacob Morrison. Mrs. Hadley recommended him. He's young, but supposedly sharp. Studied law back east, came west for opportunity. Mary looked up from the ring. He's our only option. Timber Ridge doesn't exactly have an abundance of legal minds. Is he any good? We'll find out tomorrow when we meet with him. The sisters were huddled together in the loft, speaking in low, worried voices. Caleb could hear snatches of their conversation, Sophie asking questions they couldn't answer, Emma trying to sound brave, Rebecca's quiet certainty that everything would work out somehow, Catherine's anger at the unfairness of it all. They're scared, Mary said quietly. So am I. She looked surprised. You never seem scared. You always seem so certain, so capable. I'm scared of failing them, of making promises I can't keep. Caleb folded the certificate carefully, sliding it into an oilcloth pouch for protection. Your uncle has the law on his side. We have, what? Good intentions and a rushed marriage. We have the truth. That has to count for something. In a perfect world, maybe. But the law isn't perfect. It's rigid and often unfair, especially to women and children. Mary reached across the table, her hand covering his. Then we make them see past the law to what's right. We make them understand what you've given us. Not just shelter and food, but family, belonging, a future. That has to mean something. Her faith humbled him. After everything she'd been through, she still believed in the possibility of justice. We'll do everything we can, he promised. Fight with everything we have. I know. She squeezed his hand, then stood. I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But she paused at the ladder, turning back. Caleb, thank you for marrying me. I know it wasn't. It's not how either of us planned, but I'm glad we did it, he said simply. Even without all this legal trouble, I think we would have gotten there eventually. This just pushed up the timeline. A small smile touched her lips. You're a good man, Caleb Stone. Better than we had any right to hope for. After she'd climbed to the loft and the cabin had settled into nighttime quiet, Caleb sat alone with his thoughts. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to honor her memory. Would she approve of what he'd done? Marrying another woman? Taking in 5 strangers? Upending the solitary life he'd maintained since her death? He thought she would. Sarah had always had a heart for strays and lost things. She would have loved these girls, would have welcomed them without hesitation. In a way, taking them in, fighting for them now. It was honoring her legacy more than mourning alone ever could. The next morning, They met with Jacob Morrison in his small office above the general store. He was indeed young, perhaps 30, with sharp eyes and an air of barely contained energy. "Let me be frank," he said after hearing their situation. "This is going to be difficult. Silas Brennan has a strong legal position. He's blood family, he has financial resources, and he can argue that 5 women living with an unmarried man in an isolated cabin represents an improper situation." "But we're married now," Mary protested, showing him the certificate. "Yes, and that helps. But he'll argue it's a recent development, prompted only by his claim," which it was. Morrison tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. "We need to establish that this is a genuine marriage, a genuine family, not a legal maneuver." "How do we do that?" "The girls can testify," Caleb said, "about how we've lived, how we've built a home together." Children's testimony is often discounted, especially when their own interests are at stake. We need adult witnesses, people the judge will respect. "Mrs. Hadley," Mary said immediately. "She's known in the community, respected. She can speak to our character." "Good. Who else?" "Thomas Mercer," Catherine offered. "His family owns the Double Bar Ranch. They're one of the largest landholders in the territory." Morrison nodded approvingly. "Very good. The Mercers carry weight. Anyone else?" "Gunderson the blacksmith," Caleb added, "and maybe Pastor Wilkins if he's willing. I'll approach them, gauge their willingness to testify." Morrison made notes on a pad of paper. "Now, about this inheritance. Do we know how much money is involved?" "We don't," Mary admitted. "Mama mentioned it once, but she never said an amount, just that it would be held in trust until I turned 25. "That's in 3 years. If Silas gains guardianship, he'll have control of those funds until then, and possibly longer if he can argue ongoing need for guidance. We need to find out the actual amount. It might explain his motivation. How do we do that?" "I'll send a telegram to the probate court in Ohio. It'll take a day or 2 to get a response, but it could be crucial information." They spent 2 more hours with Morrison, going over every detail of their situation, preparing for the kinds of questions the judge might ask, building their case piece by piece. When they finally left his office, Caleb felt slightly more hopeful. They had a plan, at least, a strategy. It might not be enough, but it was something. The second day was spent gathering support. Mrs. Hadley agreed immediately to testify, her eyes fierce with protective anger when she learned what Silas was attempting. "That man has no business taking those girls," she declared. "I've seen how they've flourished with you, Caleb. How Sophie's nightmares have stopped, how they all have color in their cheeks and hope in their eyes. No judge with any sense will side with a stranger from back east over that." Thomas Mercer was equally supportive, and he brought his father, Robert Mercer, owner of the Double Bar. "My son tells me you've taken in the Brennan sisters," Robert said, shaking Caleb's hand with a grip like iron. "That's good work. The frontier needs more men willing to do right by those in need. You have the Mercer family's full support." Even Gunderson, a man of few words, nodded gruffly and said he'd speak on Caleb's behalf. "You're good people," he told Mary. "All of you. That counts." By the evening of the second day, they had 7 witnesses willing to testify, and Morrison's telegram had yielded results. The inheritance was substantial, $12,000, a fortune by any standard. More than enough to motivate Silas Brennan's sudden interest in his niece's welfare. "This is our ammunition," Morrison said, showing them the telegram. "We can prove his motivation is financial, not familial. Combined with testimony about the girl's well-being under your care, we have a fighting chance." But there was still one more thing they needed, something Morrison had suggested reluctantly, knowing it would be difficult. The girls themselves should speak, he'd said. I know children's testimony is often discounted, but if they can articulate clearly why they want to stay with you, why this is their home now, it could sway the judge, especially Sophie. If a 9-year-old can stand up and say she feels safe and loved with you, that carries emotional weight. So on the third day, the morning before the hearing, they practiced. Rebecca went first, speaking clearly about the life they'd built, the skills she'd learned, the sense of security she'd found. Emma talked about the animals, about Caleb teaching her to read the forest, about feeling useful and valued. Catherine spoke with fierce pride about the work she'd done, the independence she'd gained, the respect she'd been shown. Mary's testimony focused on partnership, on the marriage they'd built, on the future they were planning together. And Sophie, tiny, brave Sophie, stood in front of them all and said in her clearest voice, "Caleb is my papa now, not because the law says so, but because he chose to be. He makes me feel safe. He carved me a horse and taught me it's okay to be sad sometimes, but that I can be happy again too. I don't want to go with Uncle Silas. I want to stay with my family." There wasn't a dry eye in the cabin when she finished. "That," Mary said shakily, "is what we tell the judge." The evening before the hearing, Caleb found himself standing outside alone, looking up at the stars. The night was cold and clear, the sky so full of stars it seemed impossible. He heard the door open behind him, footsteps on the frozen ground. Mary appeared at his side, wrapped in a shawl, her breath clouding in the cold air. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Too much thinking." "Me too." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What are you thinking about?" "Tomorrow. What we might lose, or what we might keep." He looked at her, this woman who'd come into his life by chance and stayed by choice, who'd become his partner and his wife in the space of weeks. "I love you," he said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "I don't know when it happened, but it did. You and your sisters, you're my family now. The thought of losing you." Mary turned to him, her eyes shining with tears and starlight. "I love you too," she whispered. "I fought it for weeks, told myself it was just gratitude or convenience or desperation. But it's not. It's real." He kissed her then, their first real kiss as husband and wife, and it felt like a promise. Whatever happened tomorrow, they had this moment, this truth. When they finally pulled apart, Mary rested her head against his chest, and they stood together under the stars, gathering strength for the battle ahead. "We're going to win," she said fiercely. "We have to." "We will," Caleb replied, though he didn't know if he believed it. But he had to try. For Mary, for her sisters, for the family they'd become. Tomorrow would decide everything. After Sophie's testimony, Morrison called each of the other sisters in turn. Rebecca spoke about her drawings, about how documenting their new life had helped her process grief. Emma described learning to care for animals, about the deer she'd helped heal. Catherine talked about the respect she'd been shown, the independence she'd gained, the sense of purpose she'd found in hard work. Each testimony painted the same picture, a family that had found each other through circumstance and chosen each other through love. Finally, Morrison called Mary to the stand. She walked forward with her head high, Sarah's ring visible on her finger, and swore to tell the truth. When she sat down, she looked directly at the judge, her voice steady and clear. "Mrs. Stone," Morrison began, "please tell the court about your relationship with your husband. Caleb and I began corresponding 6 months ago through a matrimonial service. I was working as a seamstress in St. Louis, supporting myself after my parents decided to move west. When I learned of their deaths and found myself responsible for my 4 sisters, I made a desperate choice. I came to Wyoming hoping Caleb would take at least me, praying he might help my sisters find situations. What did you expect when you arrived? Honestly, I expected him to choose one of us and send the others away. It would have been the reasonable thing to do. Instead, he looked at 5 frightened, desperate strangers and said we could all stay. He gave up his own comfort, sleeping in the barn so we could have the cabin. He worked himself to exhaustion building an addition so we'd have proper space. He taught us skills we needed to survive. He gave us not just shelter, but home. And your marriage? Mary's eyes found Caleb in the courtroom. Started as arrangement, became partnership, grew into love. The timing of our wedding might seem suspect, but the feelings aren't. I love my husband, and he loves me and my sisters. That's not something my uncle can claim. Hartwell stood for cross-examination, his expression calculating. Mrs. Stone, you admit the marriage was hasty, contracted only after my client filed his guardianship claim. The ceremony was recent. The commitment was not. But you lived together, unmarried, for nearly 2 months, in an isolated cabin, you and your sisters, all unwed women, living with a strange man. Surely you can see how that might appear improper. What's improper is a man who ignored his family for a decade, suddenly appearing to claim guardianship when money's involved. Mary's voice was sharp. My husband has shown us nothing but respect and kindness. Can my uncle say the same? Your uncle is concerned for your welfare. My uncle is concerned for our inheritance. There's a difference. Judge Blackwood's mouth twitched slightly. It might have been approval. Hartwell, sensing he was losing ground, shifted tactics. These younger sisters of yours, surely they'd benefit from proper schooling, from the opportunities a city like Boston could provide. They're learning every day. Rebecca's teaching Sophie to read. Caleb's teaching Emma about animals and forestry. Catherine's learning carpentry and self-sufficiency. What they're gaining is practical knowledge and family love. Boston can't offer them that. Boston can offer them culture, refinement, suitable marriage prospects. Boston can offer them separation from each other while my uncle spends their inheritance. Mary leaned forward, her voice passionate. Your Honor, I know what the law says. I know blood family typically has priority. But I'm asking you to look past the law to what's right. My sisters and I have found a home. We've found safety and love and hope for the future. Please don't take that away from us. Her voice broke on the last words, and tears finally spilled over. But she didn't look away from the judge, didn't back down. Hartwell had no more questions. Morrison called Caleb as his final witness. As Caleb took the stand, he felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom. This was it, his chance to speak for the family they'd built. Mr. Stone, Morrison began, why did you agree to take in all 5 Brennan sisters when you'd only contracted for 1 mail-order bride? Caleb thought about that day at the train station, about Sophie's small voice asking him to let them stay, about the decision that had changed everything. Because it was the right thing to do, he said simply. They were orphaned and desperate, and I had the means to help. My late wife, Sarah, she would have done the same without hesitation. Taking them in honored her memory. And now? What do these girls mean to you now? They're my family. Mary's my wife, and her sisters are my daughters in every way that matters. I've built them a home. I've taught them skills they'll need to survive and thrive. I've given them stability and protection. And in return, they've given me back a reason to live, instead of just survive. If the court grants guardianship to Mr. Brennan, what will you do? Caleb's jaw tightened. I'll appeal. I'll fight. I'll do whatever it takes to keep my family together. Because that's what fathers do. They protect their children. Hartwell's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to paint Caleb as motivated by the inheritance money or by improper interest in young women. But Caleb's answers were steady, honest, unshakable. He had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. When it was over, Morrison presented his closing argument, a passionate summary of everything they'd proven, that Silas's motivation was financial, that the girls were thriving under Caleb's care, that separating them would cause irreparable harm. Hartwell countered with the law, blood family, proper guardianship, legal precedent. Finally, Judge Blackwood called for order. I've heard testimony from both sides, he said, his voice grave. This is not a simple case. The law generally favors blood relatives in guardianship matters. However, the law also requires me to consider the best interests of the children involved. He paused, looking at the Brennan sisters sitting together in the front row, then at Silas, then back at Caleb and Mary. Mr. Brennan, your claim to guardianship is legally sound. As the paternal uncle, you have every right to petition for custody of your nieces. Caleb felt Mary's hand grip his so tight it hurt. However, the judge continued, your motivations are clearly questionable. The timing of your interest, coinciding with discovery of a substantial inheritance, suggests financial rather than familial concern. Furthermore, the testimony from the girls themselves is compelling. They've expressed clearly and consistently their wish to remain with Mr. and Mrs. Stone. He shuffled the papers before him. The court recognizes the marriage between Caleb Stone and Mary Brennan Stone as legal and binding. As Mary's husband, Mr. Stone has legal authority over household matters. The question becomes whether this authority extends to her minor sisters. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. After careful consideration, I'm ruling in favor of the defendants. Guardianship of Rebecca, Emma, and Sophie Brennan is granted to Caleb and Mary Stone. Catherine Brennan, being 19 and of legal age, is free to make her own choice regarding residence. I choose to stay with my family, Catherine said immediately, standing. Judge Blackwood nodded. So noted. The inheritance held in trust will remain under court protection until Mary Stone reaches age 25, at which point it will be distributed to the 5 sisters equally as originally intended. Mr. Silas Brennan's petition is denied. He brought down his gavel with a sharp crack that felt like thunder. Court is adjourned. For a moment, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted. Mary turned to Caleb, her face transformed by joy and relief, and threw her arms around him. Her sisters crowded around them, all of them crying and laughing at once. Sophie clutched her wooden horse and Caleb's leg simultaneously, her small face radiant. We won, Mary sobbed. We actually won. Caleb held his family close, overcome with emotion he couldn't name. They'd done it. Against the odds, against the law's usual preference, against everything. They'd won. Across the courtroom, Silas Brennan stood rigid with fury. But there was nothing he could do. The judge had spoken. The law had decided. The family would stay together. Mrs. Hadley pushed through the celebrating crowd to embrace them all, tears streaming down her weathered face. Thomas Mercer shook Caleb's hand with genuine happiness. Even taciturn Gunderson allowed himself a small smile. Jacob Morrison gathered his papers, satisfaction clear on his young face. He'd won his first major case, and he'd won it for the right reasons. As they finally left the courthouse, stepping out into the bright February sunshine. Caleb looked at his wife and daughters and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. Complete and utter peace. They were whole. They were together. They were family, not by blood or law, but by choice. And that, Caleb knew, was the strongest bond of all. 6 months passed like water flowing downhill. Inevitable, natural, right. Spring came to the mountains, melting the snow and revealing the world beneath in shades of green and gold. The addition to the cabin was complete now, with proper beds and real walls and windows that caught the morning light. It looked like what it was, a home built with love and determination, a place where a family could grow and thrive. Caleb stood on the porch in the early June sunshine, watching his daughters work in the garden they'd planted together. Emma was teaching Sophie how to tell when the lettuce was ready for picking. Rebecca sat on a stump nearby, her sketchbook open on her lap, capturing the scene with quick, sure strokes. Catherine was at the woodpile, splitting logs with the same efficient strength she'd shown from the beginning. And Mary, his wife, his partner, his love, stood at the hearth inside, humming softly as she prepared their evening meal. The gentle swell of her belly was visible now beneath her apron, the child they'd created together, growing strong and healthy. A baby. Their baby. Due in the fall, around harvest time. Caleb still couldn't quite believe it. After 3 years of living alone with ghosts, he now had a wife he loved, 5 daughters who filled his days with purpose, and another child on the way. The abundance of it overwhelmed him sometimes. "Papa!" Sophie called. She'd started calling him that naturally after the trial, and the other girls had followed suit. "Look how much lettuce we have." "That's fine work," he called back. "Bring it to your mother when you're done." Mary appeared in the doorway beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, marveling as he did every day that this was his life now. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different everything is from a year ago." "Better different?" "Much better." He kissed the top of her head. "You've given me back my life, Mary Stone." We gave it back to each other. She placed her hand over his, over the small swell where their child grew. "And we're just getting started." The sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Thomas Mercer rode into the clearing, and Catherine looked up from the woodpile, her face brightening in a way that made Caleb both happy and wary. The young ranch hand had been courting Catherine properly for the past 4 months, riding out every Sunday after church to spend time with her. Caleb had given his grudging approval, mainly because Catherine had made it clear she'd see Thomas, whether Caleb approved or not. "Afternoon, Mr. Stone, Mrs. Stone," Thomas called, dismounting. "Catherine." "Thomas." Catherine set down her axe, brushing wood chips from her skirt. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "I know, but I have something I need to ask. Something important." Thomas glanced at Caleb nervously. "Sir? Might I have a word with you?" "Privately." Caleb sighed. He knew what was coming. He'd seen it building for weeks. "All right. Let's walk." They headed toward the barn, leaving the women trying not to look too interested. Once they were out of earshot, Thomas stopped, took off his hat, and met Caleb's eyes directly. "Mr. Stone, I want to marry your daughter. Catherine, I mean. I know I should maybe wait longer, court her proper for a full year, but, well, I love her, sir. And I think she loves me. I've got steady work at the Double Bar. My father's promised me a section of land to start my own place, and I'd treat her right. I swear it on everything I hold sacred." Caleb studied the young man. Honest, hard-working, clearly smitten. Everything a father could want for his daughter, Really. Except that Catherine was only 19, and the protective part of him wanted to keep her close a while longer. "What does Catherine say about this?" he asked. "I haven't asked her yet. Wanted your permission first." "Why?" "Catherine's strong-willed enough to marry you whether I approve or not." Thomas smiled. "That's true, sir. But you're her father. Your blessing matters to her. Matters to both of us." The word father still struck Caleb as miraculous. 6 months ago, he'd been alone. Now he was a father to 5 remarkable young women. "You'll take care of her? Respect her strength and independence?" "I will. I love her for who she is, not who I might want to change her into." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then you have my permission, and my blessing." Thomas's face split into a wide grin. "Thank you, sir. Thank you. But if you hurt her, you'll come after me with that axe she's so good with." "I know, sir. I wouldn't expect any less." They shook hands, and Caleb watched the young man hurry back to where Catherine waited, her eyes full of questions. He saw Thomas drop to one knee, saw Catherine's hands fly to her mouth, saw her nod vigorously before Thomas even finished asking. Then they were in each other's arms, and the other girls were running over, squealing with excitement. Mary slipped her hand into Caleb's. "Our first daughter getting married. How do you feel?" "Old. Happy. Terrified." He shook his head. "Is this what being a father is always like?" "I imagine so. But you're doing wonderfully at it." They stood together, watching their family celebrate, and Caleb thought about the journey that had brought them here, the grief and loneliness, the desperate decision at a train station, the long, hard work of building trust and home, the fight to stay together. All of it had led to this moment, to this family, this love, this life. "Do you ever regret it?" Mary asked quietly. "Taking us all in? Your life was peaceful before we came." "Peaceful and empty." He turned to face her fully. "You and your sisters. You saved me, Mary. I was just going through the motions before, waiting to join Sarah in the ground. You gave me reasons to live again, to build, to hope. We saved each other," she said. "That's what families do." Evening fell soft and gentle over the mountains. They gathered for dinner around the expanded table, all 7 of them plus Thomas, who'd been invited to stay and celebrate. The meal was simple but abundant. Lettuce from their garden, bread Mary had baked, meat from Caleb's hunting, preserves from Mrs. Hadley. They talked and laughed, made plans for Catherine's wedding in the fall, discussed the coming baby, debated names and possibilities. Rebecca showed them her latest sketches. The family gathered together, faces full of joy. Emma reported that the deer she'd healed had returned to the clearing that morning with a spotted fawn. Sophie fell asleep at the table, her wooden horse clutched in one hand, and Caleb carried her up to the loft, tucking her into the bed in the room they'd built for her. He stood for a moment, looking down at her peaceful face, and felt his heart swell almost painfully with love. Later, when the girls had gone to bed and Thomas had ridden home, Caleb and Mary sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Remember that first night?" Mary asked, "when you slept in the barn and we were all crammed in the loft, and none of us knew if this would work? I remember thinking I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And now I think I made the best decision I ever could have." He pulled her close. "All 5 can stay. That's what I said that day. Best 4 words I ever spoke." Mary laughed softly. "Soon it'll be 6, 7 if you count Thomas. The more the merrier." And he meant it. They sat in comfortable silence as the mountains settled into night around them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The creek burbled over stones. Inside the cabin, one of the girls laughed at something in her sleep. All the sounds of home, all the sounds of family. Caleb Stone had come west 15 years ago, looking for a new life. He'd found it, lost it, and found it again in the most unexpected way. Not through blood or law or obligation, but through choice. Through the simple decision to open his home and heart to 5 desperate strangers. Sometimes, he thought, the family we need finds us in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we're wise enough to recognize it when it arrives. He looked at Mary, at the cabin full of daughters, at the mountains standing eternal against the stars, and knew, without doubt, that he was home. Not just in a place, but in a life, in a love, in a family that had chosen each other and would keep choosing each other, day after day, for all the years to come. And that was the greatest blessing any man could ask for.